So it's really a privilege to be here and to speak to you. And what I would like to do tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is two things. The ambassador already referred to them. Tell you something about how I see Europe, how I see the European continent, and more specifically the European Union developing. And secondly, of course, it was indicated what, in my view, would be the important agenda items for the upcoming NATO summit here in Chicago at the end of May. Ladies and gentlemen, I tell you nothing new when I say that Europe is going through and is facing a severe financial economic crisis. Is going through fundamental financial economic reforms and is facing a rather unprecedented age of austerity. Savage public spending cuts in a Europe which has become, partly as a consequence of the crisis, but it happened already before, a Europe which has become more inward-looking, in my opinion, than it was before. A Europe where public opinion and more in general society is impatient. There's a lot of impatience in public opinion in Europe. They want a quick fix from their political leaders. And as you know as well as I do, in many European nations, populism and populist parties are on the rise. And populism, in my opinion, is another expression of impatience. Because populists say, we know that quick fix. You're much too slow, government. We know the quick fix. We know what we should do. And they gain the support of, I'm afraid to say, rather many people by focusing on two main issues and two main subjects. The first one is migration, integration of minorities. Not a new problem. Not a problem which in all major European cities or nations is completely solved. I don't deny that there are problems, of course, with migration. But the populist parties add a spoonful of xenophobia. Not only, by the way, vis-à-vis non-Western migrants living in Europe or coming to Europe, but recently in the Netherlands also vis-à-vis our fellow Polish Europeans who come to the Netherlands to work in the greenhouses. You know, the Dutch are famous for their greenhouses, flower exports, vegetable exports. Without those Polish laborers, that sector of society would hardly survive. But they have migration, integration of minorities, and where that is not anymore sufficient, they have focused on Europe. Brussels and Europe is the source of all evil. Everything bad comes from Brussels, and everything good should come from them. And they say to me, Jaap Scheffer, to you, my distinguished audience, you can talk about globalization, and we do talk about globalization, and NATO talks about globalization, but we rather talk about glocalization with a C. I didn't coin the word, by the way. Glocalization. What does glocalization mean? It means my own village, my own city, my own region, my own province, my own nation is enough. Why the heck should I bother about other European nations? Why should I bother about Afghanistan? Why are we sending tens of thousands of soldiers to Afghanistan? Those are two main themes used by them. Not specifically Dutch, as you know, because you see populism on the rise in nations like Sweden, in Finland, in France, upcoming presidential elections in France, in Belgium, and in other nations as well. And the problem now is that you and I can fairly easily bring up the list of threats and challenges faced by us and by our societies in the 21st century. You all know this list. Terrorism with its many faces. Climate change, water shortage, food shortage, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, cybercrime and cyber attacks. You name them. Not one of these threats and challenges, not one of them, will ever find a solution within national boundaries. Not in small or medium-sized nations in Europe, and even not in a superpower like the United States of America. But the problem is, a cosmopolitan elite, of which I'm a member, I mean, I'm talking to myself here as well, a cosmopolitan elite, and the political elite more in general, has lost touch with the globalizers. In many societies, it is also a gap between the higher educated and the lower educated. So let's say the solution to the question I'm raising is extremely complicated. But I'm trying to, as I promised, to give you my analysis or what is happening on the European continent. And I do think you cannot forget about these elements then. The second thing, ladies and gentlemen, we have to realize, Europe is a secular continent. There is no continent in this world as secular or secularized as the European continent. Of course, Europe's roots, Judaism, Christianity, humanism, Enlightenment, are and stay essential roots for Europe. But in a globalizing, smaller, flatter, Friedman would say, world, where Europe is not calling the shots anymore, because the values and norms Europe has always been preaching, and the United States of America as well for that matter, are not as dominant as they have been over centuries. Think about the colonial days. So Europe is also confronted, not being a superpower, with this smaller world, and with nations and even continents where religion does play a role in society, and not only in the private domain as in Europe, but in the public domain as well. And I remember that I had very interesting and intense discussions with President Karzai of Afghanistan when I visited Afghanistan as NATO Secretary General about a notion like the universality of human rights. We have a universal declaration of human rights. And I said, Mr. President, we should discuss it. And he said, Mr. Secretary General, I don't know if your interpretation of universality is exactly the same as mine. Now, in previous times, as a European, you could say, but this is it, sorry, but end of discussion. That is not the case anymore, I'm afraid. So Europeans are not only confronted with this financial economic crisis and with populism, I think it is also a matter of identity. Where does Europe stand in the first decades of the 21st century? And Europe and the European nations have some difficulties in defining their own role.